Next to join us on the panel is the CEO, Jobberman Nigeria, Oluwa Boboye. Please, a round of applause for Oluwa. Please, a round of applause. Please, can we just, those in charge of food, please, you can see that the energy in the hall is going down. Please, maybe, Mike, hold on now, wait a minute. Sit down, I'm coming. Sit 2 minutes. Right, and finally, the CEO and co-founder, Cowrie Wise. A round of applause for Razak Ahmed. Razak Ahmed, please join us. Please, a round of applause for Razak Ahmed. Razak, maybe this way, yes. All right, Victor, they are all yours.
All right. Okay.
I guess everyone has a mic. You have a mic? Fine.
Yes.
Good.
Okay. I believe I'm good. Okay. You can all hear me? Good. So thank you to the panelists for agreeing to join us for this. Again, in the interest of time, we'll try to keep this short and punchy. I'd like to start on the angle of human capital. And Dr. Kumbi, please, I would like to start with you. One of the issues we've had to grapple with as corporate Nigeria of late has been the exodus, large-scale migration of talented workers across the chain, especially at the middle to senior management cadre levels, many of whom are exiting the country with family. This has placed a strain on many businesses in terms of hiring, placed a challenge on businesses in terms of talent sourcing to replace those that are exiting. Given the outlook, some would argue that this isn't new, but how do you see this within the context of what is required to help build and strengthen this economy?
All right, that's for me, right?
So we'll go to Dr. Kumbi first,
okay,
and then the question will also come to you.
Okay, so I'll say that good evening, everyone. Excuse my manners. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to be seated. Blessed am I amongst the men on this side of the hall. The Japa syndrome, because that's what I'm going to call it, and that's what a lot of people have been saying, is indeed something we truly must be concerned about. Yes, we have talked about brace for impact, but there are turbulent times ahead. And I'm sure the HR and the talent acquisition units in all our organizations have this challenge. So how does it affect us? Let me backtrack to where my own expertise is, which is in education. When you have the crop of your trained, experienced, and those who should take up the leadership of corporates, Nigeria, and even in the civil service are leaving, then it means that you have people who ordinarily are not qualified to take those positions that are left behind. And what has happened was a recent report says that we have a crisis. We've always been saying we have crisis in education, but it is even much more alarming now, because the report from World Bank that came out in August says that 70% of the 10-year-olds in Nigeria cannot read a simple sentence. Did you hear that? 70% of 10-year-olds in Nigeria cannot read a simple sentence. So what we have is learning poverty. If you take that higher, it simply means that those who should take on the roles that are vacant are not equipped. And so we have to go back 20-25 years. That is what is going to start happening in the next few months, next few years, that we're going to see that this is the challenge we have. But for those who are in the banking or investment sector, for those who have jackpot, so this is the other good side of it. We're going to have some of them who have taken their family, their spouses, and so there's going to be repatriation. Money is going to come back to Nigeria because they did not take maybe their fathers or their uncles and aunts. So money will come back, but at what expense? At whose expense? Let me pause there so that others can share their own thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumbi. Oralua, please perhaps you may want to then chime in at this point.
Yes.
Given what you do,
Okay.
how much of inbound traffic have you seen from Nigerians in diaspora looking to lend their expertise back home to help with this rebuild, if at all? Or if you haven't seen that, what do you think can be done to foster or facilitate such a transfer of capacity?
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Let me first start by saying that JAPMA is not, talent exodus is not a new concept. But however, it's actually different this time because there is no strategy to it. So if you, and I try to take things from the definition of it. So what is JAPMA? JAPMA is a Yoruba word, by the way. It means to escape, to run away from something, right? To be set free, pretty much, right? So the danger to the Nigerian corporate is that we then have a lot of people, mid-level, senior level, that should build our corporate structure, right? Going out, and then we have a very serious talent gap and productivity gap. And just to piggyback a little bit on what the keynote speaker mentioned, it means that in the next few months, a lot of companies will focus on training instead of growing, right? So productivity will drop. It just depends on whether you decide to acknowledge it and take stock of it. And that is a big concern. Now, how do you, back to your question, are there instances of people, coming back home to fill that gap? I don't have empirical data, unfortunately, but people are jackbuying from something, right? So it's very obvious that the encouragement to come back is not there. But what a lot of firms have done, what I have done, for instance, in Jobberman, is to create a bridge. So, of course, I've also experienced my own wave of Japa. I've had highly skilled individuals in my company leave, right? Because, they need to fend for themselves, and I have to support that. But what I have done is to create an enabling environment for continuity, such that for roles and functions that can be performed remotely, I give them the opportunity to do that. And because they are strongly connected to the vision of our company, that bond alone, right, has retained them to still contribute value into the company, even though they are not in the country, right? So I think at the corporate level for different businesses, especially banks that have now suffered this greatly, I think it's just important to deliberately, at the HR level, create inroads, right, and linkage back to these people. When someone comes to, and this is to HR practitioners, when your staff members come to you and tell you that they are leaving, please don't turn them to enemies. They are valuable people. Respect their decision, support that, and give them that inroad back into your business. Trust me, if you support them, they would form that, they would hold on to ensure that knowledge gap is mitigated as much as possible.
Thank you. Razak, you've been active in what is effectively technology, and at the Conference of Technology and Finance, one of the pioneers. The ICT sector has been one of the beacons of hope in recent times, growing at 3 times the rate of growth of the economy. And today accounts for 9.6% of GDP, which is actually more than oil at 9.5%. given the positives you've seen from that sector, are there lessons that we can draw from your own experience playing in that space that perhaps we can extend to other sectors of the economy in order to help with this, rejuvenation that we would like to see in the economy?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Victor. My pleasure to be here as well. Yeah, I think there's a lot to do in terms of the growth we've seen in the tech sector currently. More importantly is the fact that the driver of growth in that sector has been a combination of two things. Policies that are driven internally within the shore of Nigeria, and more importantly, some external factors, largely capital. Capital has been moving globally in the past 6-7 years. And to a very large extent, Nigeria and Africa as a whole have been beneficiaries to that. So what can be learned and be applied to other sectors in this space is, one, from a demographic standpoint, I think we're in a vantage position as a country. And that is primarily because the demographic structure means we are very young as a country, and young people naturally have tendencies to be attracted to this sector, largely because it fits into the lifestyle they grew up to. An average person, an average young person right now is living a digital life, right? And the tech industry fits into that digital life. And what that means is that the tech industry will continuously attract the attention, the interest of that demographic segment. And because that segment is also huge relative to the entire population, then it presents an opportunity. Then how do you ensure that this kind of attraction that we've seen in the tech industry can be replicated, say in agri, can be replicated in transportation, can be replicated in other sectors, right? Because the energy of the young people is immense. You can't quantify it. And that is what speaks to the deliberate policies of the Western world that result in what we are seeing today in terms of the immigration we're experiencing. It's not by accident. The only sad reality is that the Western world have developed policies to attract the best talent from across the world, but in this part of the world, we haven't responded appropriately in order to stem that tide. And at the company level, we might do what we can do, right? Pay the best salary possible, create cozy work environment as much as possible. There are overarching macro factors that companies can't control. My company can control the inflation rate in the country, but my staff will face the pinching effect of inflation. I can't control the infrastructure deficit we have in the country, but staff will face that as well. So when those factors are the considerations that most people point to make decisions to emigrate, then companies generally become very helpless in terms of what they can possibly do. But of course, we've seen instances where companies have responded positively, but that will just be, that won't attack the problem at the core. The problem at the core is for the country as a whole to have hope, for young people to be hopeful, for young people to have that dream that this country belongs to us, because that is the macro picture that can stem this tide. So overall, in terms of what we've seen in the tech industry, capital moving into the tech industry to encourage and build a local ecosystem, can that be replicated in a Greek sector, for example, instead of going through the whole route of old people doing agri the subsistence way? It is possible, but there has to be deliberate action. And what we've also seen is that when policies happen that way, there is this natural gravitation of external actions to support that policy, right? For example, in the tech industry, there is this reinforcing effect of external capital. And that external capital gets built on, you have local capital feed into that, and the entire ecosystem keeps growing. So if there is a policy signal in agri, for example, that is relatively favorable, there will be external capital. Capital, as we all know, will move to the right space. So if that is well in place, this can easily be replicated in other sectors. But overall, the talent issue is something that affects every industry, every sector. Some are more affected than the others, But I think at a national level, there should be a policy response to stem that tide. Otherwise, the trend will continue. As you rightly mentioned, immigration is not a new thing. It happens everywhere in the world. In fact, it's happening in some countries in a stronger way than it is happening in Nigeria. What is concerning about our current immigration scenario is the trend. Where can it possibly get to? Can it increase to 3%, 4%, 5% if things continues to get worse? And you really don't want to wait until that scenario crystallizes before you take action. So the current scenario is not as bad as we might see it to be. What is dangerous is the trend, because the trend is extremely strong. And in 5 years, 10 years' time, what would that be? And that calls for immediate policy response from the government.
Thank you for that submission. And we'll now begin to wind down this, and I'll start again in the reverse order. You touched on policy. You touched on infrastructure and certain actions that are required to perhaps change the fortunes of the country. We have an election coming. Given the issues you've mentioned, education, as Madam rightly put it, Dr. Kumbi, and what that does for the workforce productivity, what are some of the policy recommendations you would love to see being championed by candidates as well as government coming into power next year in order to begin to reposition Nigeria for positive, productive, and momentous growth?
Okay, well, I think there's a lot, but I'll just pick on few things. We can speak about, monetary policy, fiscal policy, all of those things. But I think what is critical at this point is ability to galvanize the entire country towards a common purpose. Like people having that renewed hope that something is happening in this country and we are departing from what we've been experiencing in the past 4 or 5 years. If any candidate is able to do that rightly, it has a natural effect to reignite the hope that we've lost over the past 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And I think that is at the core of it. Because right now, if you look at the scenario that we have in the country, even from regulator standpoint and policymaker standpoint, it appears that every time policymaker states they want to do X, the market reacts opposite, meaning that the market doesn't trust the policy pronouncements. So that trust deficit is an important element that needs to be fixed before we even go to the granular details of what specific actions needs to happen. And among all the candidates, frankly, I'm not sure if we've seen a force that can galvanize the entire country. But we still have a couple of months, to the election. But if that force exists that can galvanize the entire country towards a common purpose, I think that would be a fantastic starting point beyond the granular details of specific activities.
Thank you very much for that. Orolua, the question is, as someone who is an entrepreneur and who has to recruit talent, you've highlighted the impact that education has on ensuring the sustainability of the pipeline of talent. Are there things we should begin to do as a country with our education, especially given the pressures we're feeling, both in terms of corporate Nigeria as well as the medical field, where we're also losing quite a lot of our talent? What can we do differently about our education to perhaps accelerate the throughput of that pipeline to very quickly help stem that bleed?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll just run through this very quickly. So just to put it out there, like in the past, since 1999 actually, we've experienced 16 ASU strikes. 16. That's a lot, right? So we need to, even at the experiential level of education, we need to remove that blockade, right? To ensure that there is, because when you are able to properly transfer knowledge, when there is a sustained continuity. So when you experience breakage, over and over, it becomes disjointed. So that is important for us to fix. And then also there is a need for the government to fund education properly. It's a topic that's been discussed on many different platforms. I think it's just important for action to follow that discussion, right? Where there is a clear and a deliberate push by the government to make education what it should be. Of course, we know that Nigeria is faced by many different challenges, but it's very important that at this point, we put education at the forefront. We actually recognize that there is a state of emergency in our education sector, and we start to galvanize action, right, toward fixing the problem in there. So funding right now is a big concern. Now, to wrap this up, between the demand and the supply, demand being the workforce, demand being the need in the industry, supply being the workforce, there is a huge mismatch in terms of skill set needed in the workforce and what is produced in the school. For some weird reason, we have glorified the bachelor's degree, for instance. But is that what we need in Nigeria? Is that what we need in Nigeria right now? So we have a lot of graduates. Good for us, right? Lots and lots of graduates. But the workforce, the skill set needed right now, do we need more graduates or we need more technical people? So there's a need for us to be very deliberate even about the way we showcase and we attract people, students, into this school. We deliberately downgrade our technical schools. We make our polytechnic look sound a second class, right? We promote BSc. It's fine. Degree is good. BSc degree is good. But then, what is the relationship between the demand and the supply? And government needs to be very deliberate about how we push people, students, into those learning institutions.
Thank you. Dr. Kumbi, finally to you. Olua touched on something that I think is germane. That dichotomy between the, should I call it white-collared employee and the dearth of technical skills. Today, many of us struggle to find appropriately skilled artisans in several areas: carpentry, woodwork, plumbing, name it. Recently, the laws around pensions were changed, the regulations, to allow a part of our pensions going towards home ownership and mortgages. If that capital, which is 20% of what is stored on, about 14 trillion, were to be unlocked initially, we're looking at potentially up to 3 trillion naira will be available. The question is, if that money comes into the real estate construction industry today, do we have appropriate level of supply of carpenters, plumbers, electricians who can serve that industry at the skill level required to build solid houses? If not, what do we need to do to feed that sector?
The answer to that is no. We certainly don't have the required skills. And this will take me back to how our education policy started off with the 6334 system. 6 years of primary school, 3 years of junior secondary. And at that point, I know that in junior secondary school, they are meant to write the NAPTEP exams and all of that to see if they're going to go towards technical or moving on to 3 years of senior secondary school and eventually to university. We have continued to promote that our children go through the 6 and 3 and 3 and eventually to 4 years. And that is what has put us in this. You mentioned the average artisan from any of our fellow West African countries whether it's a plumber or someone who is any of the artisans, you see the difference. And it's because they were very deliberate, extremely deliberate about how they make sure that this works. And why doesn't this work? It takes me back to the basic education. What is happening in our basic? That's the foundation. If you don't get it right at the foundation level, you're just building on falsehood. It's simply building on falsehood. So if they don't have the right skill sets, literacy, numeracy, those two key things at the basic level to get into junior secondary and decide whether they're going to go into technical vocation or they're going to go ahead to get into universities and polytechnics and all of that. The thing is, our polytechnics, so we say they do their IT. What happens during that year of IT? Theory learned, do they truly have practical experience? Look at my darling Igbo brothers. What they do is apprenticeship, and that is what I would advocate for. In the UK, you don't have internship, you have apprenticeship. You find them go and learn to be a gas broiler. He goes to understudy someone, he learns, he does the practical, he writes the exams, he gets certification. But that's not what we're doing. We're not doing, and that's why the apprenticeship scheme has continued to work very well. It's something that has been studied over and over and over again in Nigeria. I don't think that when we do get them into vocational training, that they should go on and do the 1 year of IT where they can be T-boys or admin assistants. They don't get that practical training. It's not a 6 months thing. It can be a 2-year apprenticeship. It can be a 5-year, but at the end of it all, whoever they have studied under, and I think that the government should look at this even much more. You have a lot of people in technical, the mechanics, the tailors and all of that, and to have a structured scheme for those of the people who have gone to the polytechnics and monotechnics to come out and do a proper apprenticeship. I think that will change it. The second thing is I think autonomy should be given, and this comes back to ASU strike. So why is it that the government, what has happened in the last 7 months? It's just been 7 months of waste of time. What has happened? Have the lecturers gotten what they want? No. And so the children have been home for 7 months. They're back. I can assure you, because those demands were not met. In another few months, there might be another strike. But if there's an autonomy given to our higher institutions, they are able to access grants. They are able to run their institution without waiting for subvention from governments. It changes it. And a lot of us who have had the opportunity of seeing how education is run in other countries, why is it that they don't have strike? 1 day of strike is trouble. Because if I've gotten grants from various organizations, I need to deliver. And so I think we should start looking back at that. Maybe, just maybe, that will help us. But basic education, getting the right teachers, the curriculum we're teaching is archaic. I need to drop this here. My mother did her PGC in postgraduate certificate in education in one of the universities in 1980. 30 years down the line, I was also doing my postgraduate certificate in education at that time. And I was at home reading notes, and she asked me if I'd gone to the trunk box to bring out the notes. Same thing, same notes for 30 years. How can a student who is reading a 30-year-old note compare favorably with any child who has graduated, whether it's technical, whether it's junior secondary school or foundation? How can they compete favorably? So our curriculum is something else that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that sobering note, we come again to what is the reality of the Nigerian experience. With all of the challenges on the macro front, elections due, but still issues with the economy, with our finance, with governance, with national cohesion, I think our work is cut out for us. what I can say, when we look back and look at what we've done, the work we've done in chronicling the report this year, it is clear to us that part of the issues is about educating the Nigerian mind to begin to know what questions to ask and how to make decisions about who leads us. Because if the blue-collar worker, the poor of society begin to recognize where value lies in terms of education, creating opportunities for their young, which you touched on in terms of demographics, then it says that perhaps we can begin to get things right. Our banks cannot operate in isolation. They operate in an economy. They operate in a macro environment where if things were better, a lot of the complaints we have about access to finance, access to credit, will be much better served because the banks can then find credible counterparties to whom they can extend credit to and who can also behave right in terms of debt management. At this point, we'll have to bring this to a close. It's been a long evening. Thank you very much for your time and for contributing. I hand the mic back to the MC.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would have loved to ask questions, but time wouldn't permit. Although, let me just leave my question so that as you go back to your seats, you ponder, since you guys are profiling solutions to questions. And my question would be, how do we stop ASU strike, oil theft, and politicians rigging the next election? With these three simple questions, you can go back to your seats, ponder about it, and see if you can find a way out. Thank you very much.
Let's stand for pictures, please.
They will take pictures.